Hello and welcome to The Game Changers. I'm Sue Anstis, and in this podcast series you'll hear from trailblazing, fearless women in sport. In this episode, it's 4 times Ironman world champion Chrissie Wellington OBE, who, following her amazing sporting career, now works as the global head of health and wellbeing for Parkrun. Chrissie's based down in Bristol, and she was kind enough to welcome me into her lovely home for a cup of tea and a frank conversation about her career and her future aspirations. Chrissie was pretty late to the elite sporting scene and didn't compete as a professional until she was 30. So I started by asking her why she thought this was.
Different athletes take different paths to professional sporting success. Maybe mine wasn't as stereotypical as some. Yeah, but growing up, I was an active child. I wasn't sedentary. We grew up in Norfolk. We had a lot of freedom just to run around. But I think a lot of the characteristics which, in hindsight, enabled me to become successful at sport manifested at a very young age, but just in a different area of my life. So as a youngster, I was just always focused on academic excellence. So I was just focused on this self-mastery academically. I just was competitive with myself. I was so competitive with others, but that was, very much focused on my academic studies. So sport was something that I did very much for fun, just for the social side. I didn't really have aspirations to achieve any potential that I may or may not have had in sport. I did join the local swimming club, so swam for them.
I love the story of your mum and dad sitting you down and saying you could move on to the next level of swimming, but you chose to stay kind of where you were for friendships.
I was a member of the very local, swimming club, and trained 3 or 4 times a week, which compared to those children that are really prioritizing their swimming, their training 7, 8, 9, 10 times a week, but I definitely developed the technique, and maybe I'd showed some potential, and I was approached to join Norwich Penguins, which is a big swimming club in Norfolk. But I really, I wanted to be surrounded by my friends, and I also knew that would impact on my academic studies, travelling an hour to and from training. I was just really mindful of the impact that might have. So, chose to pursue kind of the academic path initially, and then continued that really at university, where I definitely did sport very much for fun, if at all.
And so when you then did come to sport and you had that meteoric, extraordinary success so quickly and early, which must have been a surprise to yourself, was that a surprise as to the huge success you had getting started?
I think some would say it was a meteoric rise and would be very surprising, but that's if I think you take that stereotypical view of a path to sporting success. So I believe that athletes, wherever they come from, are shaped by previous experiences. So yes, in terms of my sporting history, it was a surprise, but I'd had such a wealth of life experiences, and as an athlete, its success depends on so much more than physical prowess. So I think my success at sport, yes, it was a surprise in some respects, but the traits, I guess, that I needed to become successful, I'd already shown in different areas of my life. But definitely, growing up, I never had any aspirations of even competing at national level, let alone international level. And I'd watch sport on TV and occasionally from the sidelines, and just be in awe of professional athletes, but never once did I have the aspiration of ever becoming one.
And who were those athletes that inspired you growing up?
I think my role models were closer to home. As growing up, our role models change as very, young children. Our role models are our parents, and those very, very close to us. And then as we get older, it's, our friends at school and our teachers. And that was, my teachers were incredibly important for me. And they were the ones that first encouraged me, apart from my parents, first encouraged me to dream big and to aspire to greatness in terms of my academic studies, and really, really encouraged me. And for that, I still am incredibly grateful. But I saw sporting personalities on like I said, on the TV, but I don't think they were role models to me in terms of encouraging me to aspire to more, to be like them, yeah. in terms of my sport. I think I was influenced by others, at university, by my academic lecturers and by my peers. But I do remember being at a swimming pool. There was a swimming gala at Ipswich swimming pool, and Sharon Davies was at her kind of swimming athletic height then, but she'd come back to Ipswich swimming pool where she first started swimming, and I was just kind of dumbstruck to be in the presence of swimming greatness. And as a youngster, I just wanted to get as close to her as possible. Yeah. So I do remember just trying to get there, to get close enough to be able to touch her.
She told her that, did she know that?
I have told her that. We did an event last year, and I admitted that, the last time we'd actually been in the same room, I tried to sidle up and touch her. But I do remember that. And I do remember, it's amazing what an impact, Absolutely. Being in the presence of a professional sports person can have on a young person. So I'm quite cognizant of that now that I'm in that position.
And I'm conscious, we talked a bit before, there are lots of podcasts of a story and of your sort of progress into triathlon. And one of the elements that really interests me in that, getting that background into the sport, is your time in Nepal, when you were away in Nepal. So can you talk a little bit about what you were doing there, and perhaps how that created a foundation for future success?
Yeah, so I found running, as many people will know, in around 2000. I started running because of a mental release from my academic studies. I was doing my MA, and also as a means to lose weight, and entered the London Marathon in 2002, and became very focused on my new goal of trying to break 3 hours for the marathon. And then also at that time moved to London and was working for the government on international development policy. And I became quite disillusioned with high-level policy making, and really wanted to work at the grassroots. And so decided to take a sabbatical from that job and live and work in Nepal. But just before I left for Nepal, I'd kind of dipped my toe into triathlon at a very amateur level.
Is that the Eton Dorney?
The
love Eton Dorney. We've been there.
Fantastic races.
Yeah.
Fantastic, safe but very beginner friendly races, and I most certainly was a beginner. So I'd kind of dipped my toe in, became very intrigued by triathlon, started to do a little bit of swim and bike training to complement the running, but then moved to Nepal. And really swimming, and I did a bit of running in Nepal, but you can't run consistently or particularly well when you're getting chased by rabid dogs. So I was primarily biking there, and off-road biking on a mountain bike. But it was really in Nepal that I explored for the first time my capacity for endurance sports. I'd done the London Marathon, but
in a very impressive 3 hours 8 minutes, isn't it?
3 hours and 8 minutes, which again was a revelation to me. It was something I never could have expected. Both in terms of that time and just how much I enjoyed it. But in Nepal, I think I realised that I had this physical predisposition to be able to endure physically. So I just had this capacity to go all day without getting fatigued.
And how did that feel? Was that a massive surprise to you or had you'd known that in the years before as you'd done more running?
No, I hadn't, because I'd never explored it. Oh, yeah. I think we've all got talents, and unless we start to try new things and we have the opportunity and to explore them, we never know. And so I was in a position where the friends I'd made, both the Nepalis and the expats, were going out biking all day, and I thought, well, I'll go with them. And as they were getting more tired, I just didn't seem to. And we had some fabulous adventures cycling across the Himalayas, over 1,000 kilometers, all at very high altitude. And yes, so physically I found myself to be stronger than I think I ever knew I could be, but also just psychologically you're enduring different conditions, different challenges, and I was able to overcome some of those, or many of those. And so I think I just developed this, or maybe tapped into this kind of psychological strength, and then developed also the physical strength. And the physical strength that you gain from being altitude, the acclimatization, and that you lose that after returning back to sea level. But I think it's the psychological strength that stays with you. So when people say, just reflecting back on your earlier question, that I came from nowhere, well, I didn't. I came from somewhere.
Yeah.
I came from a place that I believe enabled me to be the best athlete that I could be. But it wasn't that kind of unilinear.
Yes. And I guess I love that story of you. I think it's in Argentina where you kind of rock up to an event that's full of professionals and others, and I'm on the race, and then just say that it.
Yeah. I my life journey has been one of constant surprise as I've tried new things and realised how much I enjoy them, and that I'm actually quite good at things that I maybe didn't know that I was. But so after I left Nepal, I did a little bit of cycle touring around Australia, mainly in Tasmania, and then flew to Argentina and did some cycle touring around Argentina. So I had my old trusty mountain bike and the panniers on, and I thought, I'll stop in this really beautiful town in Patagonia for a couple of days. So I still had the panniers on my bike, the rack, sorry, not the actual
his name? The bike?
Prem, Nepali for boyfriend, because I didn't have one. And so I just thought, I'll go off, stop here for a few days and just go off on some rides. So I went off on an off-road ride, and this car pulls up beside me. Well, did you know that there's this duathlon race, run, bike, run? And I said, well, no. Oh, you should enter. So I found myself in this hotel surrounded by professional athletes. Everything was in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, and but somehow managed to find my way onto the start line, minus my bike racks, the panniers, and won that race, and then ended up cycle touring with the cup that I'd managed to win and stuck in my panniers.
And that's, I guess, a lovely lesson there for everybody, isn't there? When you talk about, you wouldn't have known in terms of sport unless you tried it. As a life message of perhaps I can paint. Who knows what we can do if we don't actually attempt those things in life?
Yeah, I think some of it comes down to self-agency and being prepared to take a chance, and some of it comes down to opportunity, and we're not all blessed with the opportunities to go to Nepal and explore the possibility of cycling. But I think in all of our lives we're presented with opportunities to try new things, and we should seize them, because often we can be so scared of failure I think especially in the UK, we're sometimes scared to, put ourselves out there and be different and step into the unknown, but that can be so debilitating.
And do you think that's, I think when we work a lot with, obviously, getting women and girls into sport and trying things, and I've got 3 teenagers myself, I see that with girls around, but that a bit of a female thing of not wanting to take risks or put yourself out there to try something different, to conform. Do you see that in the work that you're doing in sport?
Yeah, there's definitely a gendered angle to that. There's evidence around job applications and the fact that men, even if they're not necessarily suitably qualified, will not hesitate to apply for something, whereas a woman would probably only apply if they felt confident that they, fulfilled all of the criteria. It might be the same in sport. I think that the reason for the gender disparity in participation is structural, and it is based on a range of different reasons. Some of those psychological, but many of them logistical and structural, and the way in which sport is governed and the way in which it's covered and managed. But the data is quite promising in terms of increased participation, both at the grassroots level and higher up in terms of elite sport, and especially in endurance sports, an increase in participation of women, which is fantastic to see.
And I guess of all sports, triathlon is fairly good in terms of its equality of opportunity and equal prize money and distances and male females competing in comparison to some other sports.
Definitely, it can be held up as an exemplar. It hasn't always been the case. There was a time where there was a differential in prize money, but triathlon is a relatively new sport, and women and men have always raced on the same course on the same day, and now for the same prize money, and I believe for the same opportunities for commercial sponsorship and media coverage. It is an egalitarian sport. It's definitely not perfect.
There's been issues in the past around Ironman places and so on. Is that resolved now, or is that...
At the World Championships, there's still a disparity in terms of the number of slots. The organisers would say that it's proportional to the number of women and men that take part, but...
Which leads which,
exactly, yeah, exactly. So there's still only 30 slots for women and 50 for men, and that's something that people are campaigning to change. But yes, relative to other sports, it is much more egalitarian.
And if we talked then to Ironman, I can't talk to you and not talk about your Ironman experiences. So moving on to that, I guess to casting your mind back to that first Ironman World Championship. So perhaps can you talk us through how it felt at that time to line up in Kona so soon, having qualified to be there?
Yeah, I guess to speak to that, I just have to backtrack as to how I did come to be there. I only became a professional athlete aged 30 in 2007, but only ever did so with the intention of being an Olympic distance athlete.
Yeah. And
with the probably unrealistic expectation of trying to qualify for Beijing the next year.
And would you have made money? Was there potential, I guess, to be on the Olympic programme? Is that what you would aspire to then?
I was probably too late to be on the Olympic programme, but you could still try. I could still have tried to have accumulated enough points to at least get myself in a position where I was able to, be considered for selection at least. But, my coach at that time probably saw something in me that I hadn't seen, and he saw an athlete that was much more predisposed to being successful at the longer distances. Not that, Olympic distance triathlon isn't long. Yeah. It's a 2-hour event.
I think it's a very long way.
Endurance event. But he saw an Ironman athlete in me. but very much trained me as an Olympic distance athlete, which is quite, fascinating actually. When you look at my program, it wasn't a kind of stereotypical long course triathletes program. And he said to me, did I want to do an Ironman? Actually, that wasn't exactly how it went. If those that know my coach know that it was more of an order. You will be doing an Ironman in 5 weeks. And regardless of the fact that you haven't got a traditional time trial bike, okay, all right. And that Ironman's in Korea, okay, where it's 90 degrees. 90% humidity. Okay. So I found myself on that start line, and I raced like I didn't have a care in the world, because I didn't. It was so new to me. And again, it was a revelation. I realised just how much I enjoyed that distance, and that I had a capacity for it that I didn't know I had. And in winning that race, I qualified for the World Championships. The catch was that 6 weeks later in Hawaii. And so I didn't really have time to think too much about it. I certainly didn't do a lot of research into what it meant to race the World Championships. All of my peers knew about the history. They were real historians of the sport, and they'd watched videos and even, raced there. And I just didn't have a clue. I didn't have a mental image of what it meant to be in, racing at the World Championships in Hawaii. So I went there blind. And the only measure I had of my potential was relative to my training partners. So I knew that some of my training partners had achieved top 10 places at previous World Championships. So I thought, right, I'm on a par with them. I can aim for a top 10. So that was my goal. And, in hindsight, I don't think you ever get perfect preparation for a race, and I don't think any race ever goes perfectly. But in hindsight, the preparation was really relatively suboptimal. I booked my accommodation very late. I was staying halfway up a volcano with 2 people I hadn't met before, in a single bed that was in a studio apartment. I didn't rent a car. My pedals on my bike broke, and I got this car garage to glue them together. I mean, it was comedic looking back, but I think it can be a real blessing, because the more experienced you are, the more you know.
Pressure.
So that can be an advantage, because knowledge is power. But I also think that, it comes with added pressure and added expectation. So I just really didn't know what it took, or what people might think it would take to prepare for this race. So I just went in and rolled with the punches, and wasn't really constrained by expectation, both my own and definitely no one else had any expectations for me. So that race was... I really haven't got the words, actually. It was momentous and joyous and liberating and life-affirming. It was a moment that changed my life forever, and my understanding of myself and my capabilities, and, catapulted me into the public eye.
And you mentioned your coach there, Brett Sutton. So I guess looking back, he was quite brutal in his approach of training athletes, and that completely worked. Brutal might not be the right word, but I think he's had a path of training greyhounds and horses, and that whole getting the very best he could do from athletes. But that doesn't necessarily work for all athletes, and I think there is there's been some concerns within the Olympic sport in the UK in terms of potentially bullying of athletes, etc. Do you think, looking back now, clearly it was right for you, but would you have had concerns about his treatment of athletes, do you think? If you now had kind of younger people going to be trained by a coach in that way?
Brett's a very controversial coach who adopts some would say very controversial methods. Some would say that the way in which he treated me, and definitely the way in which he treated others, was tantamount to bullying. I would probably agree. And do I think that makes for a healthy, sustainable coach-athlete relationship? No, I don't. And whilst his techniques may have worked for me at that time, they definitely didn't work for other athletes. And that's definitely not to say that I can now, on reflection, condone them. And it's probably one of the reasons why I needed to leave, because it wasn't the relationship that I wanted with a coach long term. I think as athletes evolve through their careers, and coaches too, then so the relationship changes, and sometimes the athlete needs something different. Sometimes the coach doesn't, need something different to that athlete. And I knew after a couple of years that I wanted a relationship with a coach that was a lot more egalitarian, a lot more reciprocal, a lot more of a partnership, and one where it wasn't based on intimidation and it wasn't based on fear and manipulation.
And do you think you'd have had that success if you had self-coached or with a different coach?
We'll never know. I definitely don't think I would have had it as quickly. There would be no other coach, not even my second coach, as fantastic as he was, Dave Scott, that would have entered me into an Ironman as early as Brett did. Brett just has this confidence and this self-belief in his philosophies and in his approach, and he truly believed, I think, that I could be world champion.
And rightly so,
Rightly so. And so I don't think necessarily that I would have achieved that success immediately under another coach. Would I have achieved it? I think under someone like Dave, yes. But maybe just not as quickly. So maybe they would have been a little bit more conservative
in their approach. And I've heard people talk in terms of, I guess, what the Ironman brings to you, that mental side of having to constantly overcome the temptation to stop and to give up at any point during an Ironman. You talk a little bit, for those that I guess would never, will never experience an Ironman, just a bit about the mental experience of completing.
I endure the same emotions in doing a 5K as I do an Ironman.
Oh, wow.
Because during a 5K, you're racing it a lot faster and a lot harder. And there'll be a point in that 5K where you think, this really, really hurts. And I'd like to stop now. And it's the same in an Ironman. Sport, if we're pushing ourselves and we want to go as fast as possible, is about learning to endure discomfort and self-doubt and pain at certain points. And I experienced that in all of the different races and challenges that I've done. But definitely over the course of an Ironman, it lasts a lot longer. For me, I was fortunate to get it over and done with as soon as possible. It's a 9-hour race. And within that 9-hour race, you're going to have incredible highs and incredible lows as well. And your success in that event is about your ability to endure both, not to get too carried away with successes and to be able to overcome the lows. And it's not just your physical prowess that's going to mean that you can succeed. It's the utilizing all of the different strategies that you got in your toolbox mentally to be able to override that discomfort or that self-doubt. And I have a variety of strategies that I've honed over the years, from having a mantra and positive affirmations to compartmentalizing the race into different segments to
while you're competing.
While I'm competing, counting Sometimes I disassociate mind from body and let my mind go. Other times I focus very much on what I'm doing, so bring myself very, very much back to the moment.
And do you have a plan for that before you go in, or does that unfold as the race unfolds with you?
No, this has to be done in training.
Right.
So training is about learning to endure and pushing your body to the point where you're able to develop these strategies. So it's as much coping with boredom or negative self-doubt as it is when, you know, you're in a state of physical discomfort. And I think most importantly, the most important weapon that you have of all is the knowledge that you have overcome in the past. So every single race, every single Ironman race I did, I wanted to quit. But I always looked back at times in training or other races that I've done when I've wanted to quit. And I think, well, I didn't then. And I went on to achieve my goal. I went on to win or went on to do a PB, and can be so grateful that I overrode that voice. So every time I want to quit, I remember the previous times that I've wanted to.
And does that translate into life generally in terms of that overcoming self-doubt, do you think?
I try to seize every opportunity, and I also know that we as human beings have this amazing capacity to endure, and there are going to be times in life that are difficult and are challenging, a lot more so than for others than for me. You know, mine is often self-inflicted, you know, through sport, but there are those that are enduring far more difficult situations than I am. But you also look to those and people and you see what they're capable of, and you can see the resilience and the tenacity, and that gives me confidence that I can do the same as well.
You talked early on, I guess you're interesting in that many athletes we talk to have goals that sport can change the world at the end of their careers, and you almost saw that what sport could do almost before you started your triathlon career in terms of crossing boundaries and transforming lives.
Yeah, I mean, sport's inherently selfish. So I don't know if athletes ever go into sport thinking, wow, through this sport I can change the world. No, we go into the sport thinking, through this sport I can achieve my personal goal. And I don't think many professional athletes would disagree with that. It's an inherently selfish pursuit. But I do believe that through our achievements in sport, we can acquire a platform that enables us to achieve so much more. Brett made me realise that through my achievements in sport, I could achieve what I wanted to out of sport. So I didn't enjoy the first 6 months of being a professional athlete. I just found it to be quite a self-absorbed, quite boring existence.
There's a risk that you'd given up your career path as well.
Yeah. I'd given up a lot. We had, I was in ascendance in terms of my position, and there were a lot of opportunities, and I don't know, I just didn't feel as fulfilled on a day-to-day basis as I thought I was going to as a professional athlete. And I said to Brett, look, I think I feel really selfish. I don't know whether I can keep doing this. And he said, look, Chrissie, through this sport, you can achieve more out of it than you could have ever imagined. And his prophecy came true. And it's really, really an important way of making an inherently selfish pursuit a little bit more worthwhile, at least for me personally. And I realised very quickly when I crossed the finish line at that World Championships in 2007 that I had this fabulous, fantastic platform. And we all do as professional athletes. We're all representatives of our sport. We're spokespeople for causes and charities. And we have a voice. And we can use that as much or as little as we like.
So many successes and championships and world records and so on. Did you have a chance when you were doing that to stop and enjoy those? Were you always looking forward to the next challenge down the road, as it were?
It's a great question. I think my biggest regret is that I didn't. enjoy those victories as much as I should have done. I am so proud of what I achieved throughout my career, and the moment of crossing that finish line in the various races that I did are memories that will stay with me forever. But you do get so caught up in pursuing the next goal that you sometimes forget to sit back and realise what you and your team have achieved. And so I think if I was to have my time again, I think I'd do a little bit more celebrating after each race.
And if you hadn't found triathlon, or triathlon found you, as it were, what do you think you might have done if you hadn't had that success in sport? Do you think about what path your life might have taken? Do you think you would have carried on in terms of the international development work, or as a civil servant? What do you think you...
I definitely would have pursued the career as a civil servant in international development, not necessarily still working within the UK, potentially working for an international agency, so WHO or the UN, almost certainly living outside of the UK. I love to travel, I love to experience new cultures, and triathlon gave me that opportunity. But international development is something I'm absolutely passionate about, and I can see myself having pursued that as a career.
In terms of your retirement, actually you were able to retire after what was an extraordinarily challenging race, like winning that final World Championship, and able to control that decision almost. So for many athletes don't perhaps have the privilege of being able to choose when they retire through injury or non-selection and so on. In terms of that transition, did that make it easier for you coming out of being a professional athlete?
The process of retirement, or the decision whether to retire, is an interesting and challenging one, and different athletes will make different decisions. Sometimes they have that agency, and others the decision is made for them. I knew intuitively that the time was right for me to retire. I wanted to retire when I'd had the race that I believed defined me as an athlete and defined me as world champion. And 2011 gave me that race. It was a race where I crossed that finish line annihilated. I'd had the race within myself, the race with my competitors. I'd overcome more than I could have ever have imagined. I won, and I knew that I could leave the sport fulfilled, and that I don't think going faster or achieving more World Championship victories or Ironman victories would have given me any more satisfaction than that race did. And so I knew that the time was right to retire, and like you said, retire on my own terms. And since that day, I have had no doubts. I wouldn't have said it's been easy. The period of transition in life never is, but it was the right decision.
And do you think athletes are made aware enough or prepare enough for that period of transition or career management, or whatever we wish to term it?
Athletes are not islands, so I think it's not just the athlete that needs to support themselves. I think they need to be that sport needs to be available to them, whether it's through federations or agents or peers, mentors. All athletes need support, and they need to be mindful that the career is always going to, as a professional sports person, it's always going to be finite. They're going to have to transition. I don't usually like the word retire. They're going to have to transition away from the sport at some point. And yes, sport equips you with the skills, but you've got to be able to use those skills and to transfer those skills and to articulate those skills to others to enable you to use them and maximise them. So I do think that athletes, even when they're at the height of their success, need the support to be able to transition, and that's in terms of employability, but also for some in terms of life skills. That they've been doing their sport from a very young age and have been cocooned from quote unquote real life. And so it's the life skills as much as, as well as the employability that's really, really important. For me, the easiest thing would have been to have carried on, because I wasn't wasn't injured. I was at the height of my success. I was financially secure. It was in my comfort zone. It was something I was good at. But that doesn't make it the best decision. And sometimes you have to take the path that scares you. And retirement or transition scared me. I was stepping out into the unknown. I was stepping away from the public identity that I'd acquired. Stepping away from routine and structure and self-validation, financial security, all of those things. But I knew deep down that that's why I needed to do it. I needed to challenge myself, and I needed to carve out that new path before it was that control was taken away from me.
And you're now global health and wellness lead for Parkrun. Get your title right.
Global head of health and wellbeing.
Parkrun.
For Parkrun. Yeah, so I've been so blessed since I retired. I think I'm fortunate to have had a career before professional sport, which has equipped me with skills and experiences, qualifications, confidence that I can then use and augment all the things I learned as a professional sports person, and bring them all to bear on my new kind of career path or paths. So I do a few different things. My principal career is as global head of health and wellbeing for Parkrun. I originally came on board pro bono for them.
All right.
It was a fortuitous meeting with the founder of Parkrun, Paul Sinton Hewitt, back in late 2012.
Right.
After the Olympics, and he said, we'd love to get someone on board to establish the junior park run. And I said, well, pick me. I said, look, I'd love to, to be able to do that for you. And so 2013 developed the strategy to launch and then roll out junior park run across the UK. So there's 270 junior park runs now across the UK, and the operations team, fantastic, and all the volunteers take care of the kind of delivery of those events. Over the past few years, Parkrun's mission has been nuanced to better reflect what we want to do. So we want to be a lot more proactive in engaging those that are less active and who have health conditions in Parkrun, both as walkers, runners and volunteers. So our mission is now to create a healthier and happier planet. So my role is to basically operationalize that mission and deliver on that. So I develop all of the interventions, all of the research around engaging marginalised groups and those that are otherwise excluded from more traditional physical activity offerings.
And it's a global role, so that, I guess, ticks that box for you in terms of taking sport to other places across the world. And where are you involved there at the moment?
Yeah, well, prior to our daughter being born, it was a 5-day-a-week role.
All right.
Now I work 3 days. So my capacity to focus on all of our 21 territories around the world is limited. So I'm very much focused on UK, Ireland, South Africa and Australia at the moment. That's not to say we're not considering all the other territories, but just focusing on those that are largest and most well established. So I don't travel as much, but I am liaising regularly with our leads in those different territories.
And Parkrun doing some amazing stuff. I think I saw across social at the weekend even, but in Australia working with the prison service. And I mean, Parkrun, very different to how perhaps people have visualised it as it started out, but how it's evolving.
I think out of all the things that I've done throughout my life, being part of an initiative to establish Parkruns across the secure estate in prisons, essentially, has been the most fulfilling and gratifying. And had we been approached by a prison maybe 4 or 5 years ago, I think we would have just said, no, it's not really what we do. But we're so intent on reaching those that have fewer opportunities to participate in physical activity. We were open to the idea of establishing those secure estate parkruns. So now we have 16 in the UK, and Ireland, and then one more now launched
okay.
in Australia, with many more in the pipeline. The demand has been overwhelming. The support from UK government has been fantastic, from partners. It's been a real collaborative effort, and it's been something that I'm incredibly proud and feel very privileged to have been involved with, and working with a research team now to actually evaluate the initiative, both in terms of the implementation, so how's it being delivered, and in terms of the impact, because it's so important. We can't just implement an initiative without that detailed insight into what's happening on the ground. But the anecdotal evidence is that it's
powerful,
having a hugely positive impact across a range of measures, not only for the prisoners themselves, but also for staff and the families of those that are incarcerated. So we're hoping that the quantitative and qualitative research kind of validates our...
so exciting, isn't it?
Yeah, our assumptions. But yeah, it's really exciting. And for me, I can combine both my passions and, really importantly, work with a fantastic team of people, like-minded group of people, and an organisation that works very flexibly. And there's a lot to be said for that, because I think it would have been very difficult for me to have gone from essentially being my own boss, albeit in quite a structured existence, to then having a 9-to-5 job in an office where I clock in and clock out and have to wear a certain kind of uniform or whatever.
Yeah.
So Parkrun is very mindful of the fact that there's work to do and you have a role, but you can achieve in that role in many different ways. There's lots of different ways of working, and they're very accommodating of that. And I think as a former athlete especially, I really welcome.
Yeah, more productive for them as well. It's fantastic to hear. And I guess just a couple more questions, if I can. The podcast Game Changers about trailblazing, extraordinary, fearless women. You tick lots of those boxes, clearly. But when you look back in 30 years or so, what do you feel will be the biggest legacy that you will leave?
I think we all have an opportunity to leave a legacy, not just sports people, each and every one of us. And my life has been like this amazing tree that's branched in many different ways. So I'm hoping that every single branch I can impact people positively. What I hope is that through my sporting achievements, I show that we're capable of so much more than we ever think. And that also translates into the other areas of my life, in terms of, I think people generally are capable of so much more given the opportunity. So I think now all I want to do is ensure that as many people are blessed with the opportunity to explore what they're capable of.
Wow, thanks so much to Chrissie for taking the time to talk to me and openly sharing so much about her journey in sport. What an utterly extraordinary woman. I'd love to hear what you think about the Game Changers podcast, so please do leave a review or give us a rating. It makes a big difference, and it will help us to spread the word about these amazing women in sport. To make sure you don't miss out on future episodes, please subscribe to the Game Changers, and you can find out more about all the guests at promotepr.com/gamechangers. Next week, it's Sally Mundy MBE, the current head of England Hockey, who has just been appointed to one of the most senior roles in sport, the CEO of UK Sport. It's a fascinating conversation where Sally talks candidly about her achievements and challenges at hockey and her hopes for the future of British sport.
It's interesting, I've been asked where my leadership journey started. And I really believe that my leadership journey started when I was about 4. I remember that one of my earliest memories is being about 4, stood in my bedroom with my 3 sisters, with my hands on my hips, thinking, I am so fed up with being told what to do. I would like to make the decisions. I want to be in charge.